A 13-year-old teenager fell behind his group and got lost in the mountain forests. For 9 days, he faced extreme weather conditions, hunger and fear, relying on his resourcefulness and faith to navigate the treacherous terrain. The film, based on real events, begins on July 15, 1939, in the state of Maine. Two brothers, Ryan and Don Fendler, play in the forest near their home, swimming in the flowing water. Hearing the sound of their father's approaching car engine, they run out onto the dirt road and chase all the way home. Donald Fendler arrives home to his wife, Ruth, and their children. The older sons soon come running to them, unable to contain their joy at the reunion. Overwhelmed with emotion, Don spits to the side, which displeases his father. Such behavior is unacceptable for a gentleman, especially in front of their mother. While waiting for dinner, as the head of the family solemnly reads the troubling news in the newspaper, the brothers play with a toy train on the floor. As often happens, the playful roughhousing turns into an argument, which escalates into a scuffle. Their annoyed father sends the boys outside to wash the car as punishment, but even there, their bickering continues. Noticing from the window that the boys are fighting, their mother sends their father to intervene. At the sight of their stern father, the boys stop fighting, but he insists that they must continue their fight if they want to. Only this time for real. However, the situation is defused by their mother's arrival, calling everyone to dinner. Later at the dinner table, the family discusses the upcoming trip for the men of the household to Mount Katahdin. Don is unhappy that instead of the promised 2-week fishing trip, they will have only a miserable 2-day hike. He argues with his father about his constant busyness, then leaves the table and goes to his room. Their mother has to calm him down, combining a heartfelt conversation with giving him a haircut on the porch steps. In the morning, Donald and his 3 sons get into the car. Ruth and their daughter see them off on the family trip before the group sets off through the picturesque landscapes of Maine. Soon the magnificent Mount Katahdin appears ahead, where they plan to set up camp at its base. As they approach the campsite, they are met by the final member of the expedition, their guide, Henry. Upon reaching the campsite, the boys set up the tent while the adults and younger children prepare the campfire. When night falls, under the bright flames of the fire, Henry tells the children about the spirit of the local mountain. According to local Native American legends, it has enormous, sprawling antlers and equally massive wings. Adding to the eerie atmosphere of the story, a storm begins to roll in, sending flashes of lightning through the night. The tale sinks deep into Don's mind, making it difficult for him to fall asleep as he lies in the tent, listening to the whistling wind. Sleeping in the car with the youngest child, Donald begins to worry and steps out to check how they are doing in the tent. He gently strokes the sleeping Don, with whom he has been arguing more frequently lately. The boy is entering adolescence. On the morning of the first day, the entire group sets out toward the mountain to climb one of its peaks. Henry leads the way, while Donald takes up the rear. Along the way, they encounter another group of hikers returning along the popular trail. Soon the weather begins to deteriorate. The fog thickens, humidity rises, and climbing over the rocks becomes increasingly difficult, especially for the youngest child. Only Don is obsessed with reaching the summit. When his father suggests turning back, he argues, reminding him that he himself had taught them to always finish what they start. Donald decides to return with the exhausted youngest child, allowing the older sons to continue on with Henry. The higher the boys and their guide climb, the denser the fog becomes. The dampness makes Ryan shiver with cold, forcing Don to take off his sweater and give it to his brother. A true mountain conqueror, he figures he can manage with just his windbreaker. Reaching the very top, Don is able to enjoy the breathtaking view of the cliff, but the thick fog limits visibility to just a few meters. Ryan does not share his brother's excitement. They start arguing again, nearly breaking into a fight, forcing Henry to intervene and separate them, otherwise the boys risk falling down. After that, an enraged Don runs down the mountain in the pouring rain, breaking away from the group. Ryan and Henry rush after him, but driven by anger, Don quickly distances himself from them. In the end, the completely soaked hikers split into 2 groups. Don gets lost somewhere among the mountain rocks, while the guide and Ryan descend back to Donald. Realizing how far his outburst of anger has taken him, Don panics and shouts into the rain, trying to call out to his father, but to no avail. Desperate to find his son, his father sends Henry to the ranger station to organize a rescue effort. After a brief but heavy downpour, Don makes his way into the forest. There he stumbles into a grass-covered puddle, where he finds the skeleton of an animal that wasn't lucky enough to escape. The boy also gets caught in the trap of thorny plants that tangle around his legs. Struggling to free himself from the thicket, he is forced to leave his past behind. He then wanders through the forests until nightfall. Later he notices that his shoes have fallen apart into rags, unable to withstand the harsh conditions. His socks have worn through, and one of his toes is injured. Tearing a strip from his shirt, he wraps the wound with a makeshift bandage before lying down directly on the ground to sleep. Meanwhile, dozens of rangers and volunteers scour the dark forest with flashlights, desperately trying to find him. His father, meanwhile, is forced to call home to deliver the terrible news to his wife. On the morning of the second day, Ruth arrives at the ranger headquarters, where they are reviewing the search plan on a map. She anxiously asks what is being done to save her son, to which a ranger replies that everything possible is being done. Dozens of volunteers from nearby settlements have been recruited. Upon waking up, Don sees a bird feather floating above him. Picking it up, he stands up and spits on the ground, realizing that his father isn't around to scold him for it. Debo mockingly imitates his father until insect bites drive him forward. Pushing through some overgrown grass, he reaches a body of water and wades across it. Continuing on his way, he wraps his other foot as well. Walking barefoot through rough terrain starts to take its toll. On the third day, he reaches a mountain river with small waterfalls. The sight fills him with optimism. Don splashes in the water, bathing and singing. However, his carefree moment is cut short by the realization that dozens of leeches have chosen him as their meal. With great effort, he peels the disgusting bloodsuckers off his skin before continuing on his journey. For days later, Ryan is growing increasingly worried about his brother. He asks their mother if she believes he is still alive. Meanwhile, in the forest, the search efforts expand. More and more volunteers join the rescue operation, and the campsite continues to grow. A field kitchen and a mobile medical station are set up, yet all efforts remain fruitless. There is still no trace of the lost bow. Sensing a sensational story, journalists arrive at the site, forcing the head ranger to divert his attention to a press conference. As reporters spread the news to newspaper readers, the hungry bow continues wandering the forest alone. Don's father, realizing that there is nothing more he can do, returns home to support his wife emotionally. During this difficult time, the fifth day arrives. Don stumbles upon a cave in the forest and rushes toward it, hoping to find people inside. However, the cave turns out to have been abandoned long ago. Nevertheless, some old belongings of former inhabitants remain inside. Digging through a trunk, the boy finds a pile of useless junk, among which is a bent fork. Then, recalling his Boy Scout skills, he attempts to catch fish with his bare hands in the running water, but the attempt ends in failure. Remembering another hunting technique, the boy tries to spear a fish with a makeshift harpoon or stun it with a rock, but once again, his chances of catching anything are close to zero. Regaining his strength after his failed attempt at fishing, Don suddenly comes up with a brilliant idea using his shirt as a net. This way, he manages to outsmart a foolish fish and catch one. Trying to create a spark with a horseshoe he found, Don once again faces failure and is forced to eat the fish raw. Before doing so, he pierces his catch with the bent fork he discovered earlier. The first bite nearly makes him sick, but he has no other choice. As he eats, he recalls his home and family dinners in the kitchen, where food never had to be obtained with such effort. Even the last ray of the setting sun, visible through the tree canopy, cannot pull him out of his memories. The sixth day begins. Waking up in the forest, still lost, Don continues his journey into the unknown, stopping at mountain streams to drink water and reminiscing about the day he ran away from Henry and Ryan. Another day passes. On the seventh day, Ruth helps the volunteers in the camp prepare food for those searching for the missing boy. They come across a crevice in the rock, emitting a foul, decaying odor. However, it is too small for an adult man. Even the slim Henry cannot squeeze through. Ryan then volunteers to check it out. Crawling inside, he discovers remains, but to his relief, they belong not to his brother but to a dead raccoon. He rushes to inform his father and the other rescuers. Later, sitting on the porch, Debo confesses to his father that he blames himself for his brother's disappearance. If they hadn't argued that day, Don wouldn't have run off. Donald reassures his son, telling him that the responsibility lies with him, and promising to find their lost boy. The eighth day begins. While the rangers review the search map, the missing boy wakes up to the sound of a plane flying overhead. Spotting it above, he desperately shouts to attract attention, but with the dense forest canopy, the chances of being seen are non-existent. Exhausted and losing hope, Don collapses onto his back and lies motionless until evening. Weakened by stress, his mind conjures up hallucinations, a terrifying vision of the mythical spirit Henry had spoken of around the campfire. The spirit gently wraps his wings around the bow, warming him and allowing him to sleep. At that very moment, his father, who had dozed off, suddenly realizes he must act. He rushes to save his son, but stumbles in the darkness, crashing into tree branches and falling. He is taken to the hospital with injuries, where Ruth arrives to ensure he is alright. On the 9th day, Don is bitten by a spider early in the morning. Later he bends down to examine an animal skull he finds in the dry grass. After inspecting it, he continues his aimless journey, but his exhausted mind once again betrays him, distorting reality. In the middle of a clearing, Don sees a soft bed and lies down, ready to surrender to eternal sleep. In his half-conscious state, the faces of his loved ones flash before his eyes, his brothers, his sister, his mother. Suddenly he envisions his father calling him to follow. Trying to catch up with the vision, Don stumbles upon a river and sees houses and a woman washing clothes on the other side. Climbing onto a riverside rock, he calls for help. At the hospital, Ruth rushes into her husband's room, and from her joyful expression, Donald immediately understands. Soon the washed and clothed boy is transported by kayak down the river to his overjoyed mother. They meet and embrace right there, in the middle of the river. Don is then taken to the hospital, where he is met by medical staff, persistent reporters eager for a sensational story, and his entire family, who cannot stop holding him in their arms. Ryan returns the sweater Don had given him on that fateful day. The last thing Don sees is his father sitting in the hospital room with a bandage on his face. The man embraces his son and whispers that he loves him, bringing tears to the boy's eyes. The film ends with archival footage of the real rescue of Don Fendler, along with interview clips from the real people involved in the story and a historical summary. Don returned to Mount Katahdin in 1976 to conquer his fear. He passed away in 2016 at the age of 90. Thank you for watching, and see you next time on our channel.